Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. This is my capstone project for Cal State Fullerton for the GIS certification program, and we're going to be discussing some of the criteria that it might take to select a new location for a municipal well in LA County. Here I have some photos. I recently completed an internship with Inland Empire Utilities Agency. I did work for the groundwater recharge department. We did a lot of field work and sampling for groundwater and municipal wells. So these pictures are just to give you an idea of what our setup would look like in the field for sampling and also some of the equipment we used. So all of the work we did there was the inspiration for this project. So thank you to everyone at IUA, especially from the groundwater recharge department, and for Steve Smith, who was my supervisor. Thank you for the opportunity. And of course for Alan Wong. She was a mentor to me. She taught me everything I knew, and her assistance also helped me for this project. Now, before we take a closer look at our maps, our main criteria is that the new well location should be in LA County and especially in LA River watershed. So for our 5 main criteria, we're going to take a look at the distance from other wells, groundwater levels, cleanup areas, the soil, and the freeways. For the methods and analysis, for my methods, I started with LA County boundaries and wells and used that as a basic framework for the rest of the map. Later on, I added more detail layers. I based this off of important well characteristics, water quality protection, and my fieldwork experience. For the analysis, I started with an XY table to point tool. I use this to convert an Excel spreadsheet into coordinate points. For the clip tool, I use this for almost all the layers because some of it was for the whole state of California, some of it was for the entire LA County, so I had to clip it down for either the county or the LA River watershed. I also use the kernel density tool for the cleanup areas and pairwise buffers for the freeways, the well location, and the rising groundwater levels. Before we start getting into our 5 criteria, I just want you to see a general overview of what our watersheds look like. So there's several watersheds here, and we're focusing on the LA River watershed, which is more towards the center of LA County. To begin with, I'd like to start with freeways for the first set of criteria. I created a 1-mile buffer around all of the freeways. For those who are technicians that do any sampling or maintenance of the wells themselves, it's easiest to have them right off the freeway for easier access. So for our scenario, we're just going to make sure that our new well location is within 1 mile of any freeway. In this case, it's right off of the 5 freeway. Our new set of criteria are the LA County wells. Each well is symbolized by 1 point, and each one has its own 1-mile buffer. The reasoning for this is that some but not all wells have a regulation where they have to be at least 1 mile away from each other. Moreover, it makes more sense to dig a well away from the existing ones so that we can test the groundwater quality at new locations as opposed to areas that have high well densities already. The next criteria are cleanup areas. These are areas that have underground storage tanks filled with chemicals, and they're currently being dug up in order to rehabilitate these areas. This is actually bad news for groundwater, and it's a big source of contamination. So we want to be as far away from these storage tank cleanup areas as possible. The red areas are the most dense with cleanup areas, and the purple ones have the least amount of storage tanks possible. So anything outside of that purple zone means that there's no storage tanks, no cleanup areas, and it's the safest for the groundwater to avoid contamination. For the next criteria, we're going to take a look at rising groundwater levels. There are monitoring wells that have seasonal and annual data of whether the groundwater goes up or down, and we're only going to look at the cases where there's a rise in groundwater level, not a drop. So we have our data divided into 5 classes, with yellow meaning less groundwater rise, and red meaning more groundwater level rise, which is a very good thing. So our 1 red point means that there's a very high rise in groundwater, which is very good because it's more economical, it's less digging, It's less time, money, resources, and it's also easier groundwater access for those technicians out there that will be doing the sampling. Moreover, the new well location should be within the 5 mile buffer placed, so anywhere within that 5 mile range is good, so that it's close enough to also have the benefit of the higher groundwater levels. Last but not least, we have our soil runoff, and we've divided this into 5 runoff coefficient classes. So the yellow areas symbolized a low runoff coefficient, so that means that there's less runoff, the soil is more absorbent, so whenever it rains, all the toxic and chemicals in the stormwater, it can contaminate the groundwater, soak into the soil, and it can contaminate the samples. This is not good. Meanwhile, the red areas have a high runoff coefficient, and that means that those soils are less absorbent and less likely to be getting any toxins that might be in the stormwater. In order to continue meeting all the previous criteria that we've mentioned so far, we're going to have to pick an area with the runoff coefficient from 11 to 110, so those 2 orange shades. So when you look at that inset map in the corner, it'll give you a blown up, zoomed in version. The runoff coefficient is in the 60s and it's on an orange area. So indeed, we do have a good runoff level and we're still meeting all the other criteria as well. Finally, this is the part we've all been waiting for, the final result. Our new well location covers all 5 criteria. We are within 1 mile of the freeways, in this case the 5 freeway. We are at least a mile away from all the other wells. We're in an area with no cleanup areas and underground storage tanks. We're within 5 miles of the red point that shows a high groundwater rise. And lastly, we have a runoff coefficient in the 60s that's symbolized in orange. Therefore, we have a good soil runoff. At last, here are my sources that I've used for this project. I've used data from water boards, LA County, City of LA, and the state of California. Thank you all so much for listening and have a great day.